Whenever there's a murder, it's the job of detectives to find out who the killer is and how they killed. And often, it's forensic evidence which provides the clues.
The finding of his DNA wasn't just on the murder weapon, it was on a most important part of the murder weapon.
This evidence was the breakthrough that we needed.
The forensic evidence in this case was crucial.
In this series, we shine a light on how cutting-edge forensic techniques and the power of science brought the most dangerous killers to justice.
A truly horrific criminal, a monster.
It's a hammer blow. You don't know how you're going to carry on.
We'll hear how some of the most disturbing crimes were solved thanks to the tiniest fragments of evidence.
He basically said to me, she's in the house, go and find her.
The amount of blood that was there indicated that there was a frenzied attack.
There was no reasonable explanation for them if that's why he changed his plea.
And how even the most forensically aware of killers couldn't beat the experts and hide their crimes.
The key thing about having a DNA profile is you've got probably the sharpest tool in the box.
I was so elated beforehand. We didn't have the evidence and all of a sudden we'd cracked it.
In this episode, a young woman is found dead in her flat.
She'd clearly been assaulted in quite a brutal fashion. Her jaw was broken. She had been hit quite severely.
An attack of remarkable violence that shocked investigators.
I had a CID for about 3.5, 4 years. And this really was a bad scene. One of the worst I'd seen.
A crime scene rich with clues.
Forensic examination of Suzanne revealed a number of red fibres found on her body. They didn't belong to any of the textiles that were present at the scene.
And a community of loved ones devastated by loss. This is Forensics, Catching the Killer.
It was 6:30 on Friday, the 1st of July, that she was found by her boyfriend. He came into the flat, opened the door and found the body and ran out, collapsed on the floor. Local people came and picked him up and police were called.
The young man's girlfriend was Suzanne Greenhill. In 1988, she'd been living on her own in a flat on a quiet residential street in Newport, South Wales. The scene which her boyfriend and then local police found was one of pure horror.
I arrived here about 7:30 on the 1st of July 1988.
Mark Waters was head of CID at Gwank Constabulary at the time.
I called scenes of crime, and as soon as they arrived, they went into the flat, took over the scene. I asked them to, as quickly as they could, to arrange a pathway for myself and the pathologist. He arrived, and Dr. Kell and I went in and examined the body.
She'd clearly been assaulted in quite a brutal fashion. She had her jaw was broken, so clearly she had been hit quite severely. It was also pretty clear that she had been sexually assaulted too. Quite a bit of blood around, and also there was blood leading into the bathroom.
Everything that we do, every instruction to the scenes of crime people, I obviously take their advice, but there are things certainly things I want. There was an officer outside, so everybody who came to the scene was recorded. What time they came, how long they were at the scene, and what time they left. Everybody wore clothing, protective clothing, to go to the scene, because you don't want any cross-contamination. So that was important. And then the scenes of crime men were given the time to really go through the property with a fine-tooth comb. We always took Polaroid cameras, shots at the scene. We took them with a camera for the main scenes of crime work, but we took Polaroids for the incident room. So we'd have them instantly. So pictures of the body, pictures of the clothing. I had a CID for about 3.5, 4 years. And this really was a bad scene. One of the worst I'd seen. And was quite a shock to the system of everybody. And the realization that we had someone here who was a vicious killer. And that, of course, put more pressure on finding the person as quickly as possible.
Aside from the obvious brutality with which Suzanne had been killed, there was one very chilling and disturbing element to the scene, which Mark and his team found.
Somebody had cut a piece of medical plaster and put it across her eyes. So it was across her eyes. So she was lying there, three-quarter prone, with this plaster across her eyes. There was no sign of this plaster anywhere in the flat, so whoever killed her brought that with him, which is rather strange.
Despite their personal shock at a murder scene like no other that most had ever attended, the team moved quickly to start the investigation.
The scene itself was very muddy. Suzanne kept a very tidy flat, and whoever was there had killed her in her bedroom, and she was next door to a laundry basket, which I think had been interfered with. It was like as if somebody was in that room, in that laundry basket, doing something with the laundry basket, and she walked in and disturbed them. That's what it looked like. They punched her and then stabbed her.
The initial forensic assessment of the scene provided clues to just how Suzanne had been killed.
There was a lot of blood stains within the bedroom area, but also in the bathroom at the flat. And the amount of blood that was there indicated that there was a frenzied attack, but it also indicated that there was potentially that the perpetrator had tried to clean up as well.
But there was one particularly unusual aspect to this murder investigation. Suzanne was deaf. Her friend Angela was out shopping with her mum when the news broke on the radio.
Oh. Yeah. I don't know. Tom.
But it was Suzanne. And now detectives and forensic scientists needed to start the meticulous search and investigation of her home, the crime scene. In 1988, a young man arrived at his girlfriend's flat in Newport, South Wales, to find her brutally murdered. Detectives at Gwent Constabulary, led by head of CID Mark Waters, faced an unprecedented challenge. Not only was this an exceptionally violent murder, but the victim, Suzanne Greenhill, and most of her associates were deaf.
She was 20 at the time that she was murdered. She was a local girl. By all accounts, she was quite popular. She was quite an outgoing girl. She tended to mix very much in the deaf community of Newport, of whom there were a number. They would have social events, they'd meet up for drinks, etc. pretty regularly, and they actually managed to create their own little community amongst themselves in order that members of it were not too isolated. So she got her own flat that she was renting. By all accounts, it was quite well looked after. She had a cat, she had a job, so she was doing reasonably well.
Suzanne's childhood and early teens had been challenging. She was bullied in school and felt isolated outside of it. But as a young adult living an independent life with newly found interests, Suzanne had come into her own. Suzanne was an active member of Newport's deaf community, a tight-knit group within a small town where people tended to know their neighbours and notice anything out of the ordinary.
Newport in the 1980s would have been a typically quite provincial town. It would have been very much like many other middling-sized towns in Wales and England, where everyone was really focused on what was going on locally, where people knew each other and just got on with their lives.
As with any murder investigation, detectives began to look at those who knew the victim.
We started looking very closely at associates, friends, people who could have been at the flat. There was no forcible entry, so she either let this man in or they had a key. From our investigations, there was no one who had a key other than a boyfriend who found the body. It was in a very bad state at that time.
But interviewing Suzanne's friends would add an extra layer of complexity to the investigation.
I was a bit concerned because our interviews were taking place with sign language experts, and they were very, very helpful. But I realized that when they're asking questions, the officer asks the question, they interpret it, they do the sign language, and they've got to read the answers as a police officer would read an answer. But there was a big gap there. We'd never had any experience of this at all, because this is something, you know, we had to develop that skill. It's working with the interpreters, and the interpreters equally trying to find out what we wanted. And there was identifying how a person reacts to a certain question, which as a police officer, when you have a direct question, you know. But you've got to go through all this. We develop our skills, put it that way.
Suzanne's friend Angela was one of those interviewed. At the time, few police forces had experience of conducting interviews with deaf people. So detectives at Gwent Police had to learn and adapt quickly.
The police have proper interpretation, and through that they identify malice the interpretation. But I think because at that time of the day, I was doing proper interpretation, and the people who could do the society were very self-focused.
Over 2,500 people were interviewed. Remember, of course, you've got a society, you've got a young lady who belongs to an organisation that is nationwide. They go to trips, they go all over the place. They go to schools in different areas, they get close to people from different parts of UK. So there was a big group of people who she had contact with, she wrote to. So it was quite a wide range of friends.
Mark and his team knew that the killer might himself be a member of the local deaf community and that he could strike again.
And there were some vulnerable girls in that group that, you know, were mixing with people that we suspected could be, you know, involved. So, you know, yes, it was a worry. We spoke to everybody involved and told them what we, you know, that we were worried and to keep an eye on the girls.
With an apparent lack of witnesses to the murder, detectives tried to piece together Suzanne's last movements and who might have last seen her alive. The statement from Suzanne's boyfriend and the details of when he had last seen her alive would provide the first clues.
He hadn't seen her for 3 days or so. It was very hot weather and the body was starting to swell. So we knew that she'd been killed 3 or 4 days before we found her. Our inquiries developed, we could visually put it down to the Tuesday, particularly as the lady that came forward and said, well, I used to walk past every day and her curtains were always drawn. She came on the Tuesday morning, they were drawn and Suzanne was looking at the window. And then on the Wednesday they were drawn, Thursday morning they were drawn again, and on Friday morning they were drawn. So we worked it out that Suzanne was alive on the Tuesday, but not on the Wednesday, Thursday or the Friday, when the body was found on Friday evening.
While Mark and his team tried to find out who were the last people to see Suzanne alive, details of the post-mortem revealed the horror of what she had suffered in the attack.
What we found was 17 stab wounds in the throat, cut the carotid artery, and she'd had some stab wounds in her back. Her clothing had been removed, the lower part of her clothing had been removed down to her ankles. And there was, it appeared that she had at some stages her arms behind her back. Whether they were tied or handcuffs used, we don't know, because it didn't find anything. But it appeared that her arms were behind her back. What was quite clear at the post-mortem was she'd received a blow, very heavy blow to the face before being attacked with the knife wounds. Her face was swollen. Somebody had punched her on the face and the chin. Whether she was unconscious after that, it could have been quite a severe blow. But it was quite a frenzied attack.
And there was one more very remarkable finding.
Forensic examination of Suzanne revealed a number of red fibres found on her body, and these fibres were compared to fibres and textiles that might have been within her property and on her clothing, and they were extraneous, they were foreign to that environment, so they didn't belong to any of the fibres or the textiles that were present at the scene.
So if these red fibres didn't come from anything in Suzanne's flat, where did they come from? And who had inadvertently brought them there? Could it be the same person who left another mark on Suzanne's bedroom door?
I also then invited once the scene was cleared, the specialist fingerprint people from a neighbouring force. They came to the scene and looked very carefully at what had been found and what had been lifted, and they saw a print in blood on the bedroom door, which they suggested was a partial left thumbprint. At that stage, they were the experts. I said, right, if that's what you say it is, we've got a problem, because we've got to match people up to this. Obviously, it's going to be helpful if you're right. But they were convinced it was a partial left thumbprint. Whoever left that print was the killer.
In the summer of 1988, Newport's close-knit community was rocked by the brutal murder of 20-year-old Suzanne Greenhill in her own home. She had been raped and stabbed to death. Like many of her friends, Suzanne was also deaf.
It was a terrible murder, ruthless killing. Everybody in the town was frightened. And within the deaf community, clearly their entertainment, their whole social life was being affected by it. They were frightened, obviously, restricted. It was restrictive to a lot of people, because young girls didn't want to go to town, they were all frightened. Lots of things were either cancelled, or people were frightened to let their daughters go, or young people go. And it was very tense, very tense. In a community like this, everybody's trying to help as well, because they want these sort of people out of their way, locked up.
The brutal murder was made more disturbing by the fact the killer had taped up Suzanne's eyes with adhesive bandages.
She can't speak, she can't hear, and you're taking the only thing that she's left is her eyes, her sight. Why did he take the plaster to the house? I think he carried the tape, the knife, and probably some other bits and bobs. There was no sign of this plaster anywhere in the flat, so whoever killed her brought that with him.
Although the killer had taken the tape and murder weapon with him when he left, there were other things which he did leave behind. The distinctive red fibres, the bloody thumbprint, and now forensic investigators would find something else.
In fact, he'd taken his clothes off because we could see footprints in blood on the floor of the bathroom, which we photographed, measured, and sent off to an anthropologist to look at, because from that we were told we could get an idea of the height, possible build of the killer.
Often when there is an attack like that that's so frenzied, we may expect to see lots of bloodstains, and the bloodstains can be used and we can conduct blood pattern analysis to determine the manner in which they were deposited. Essentially, when somebody is hit or there's a breach of the circulatory system, the forces that are holding the blood together will break apart, and the blood may travel through the air and land on sort of walls and surfaces. In this case, blood pattern analysis could be conducted by looking at the manner in which the bloodstains were deposited, so in the bedroom, in the bathroom. The blood pattern showed that she'd been stabbed multiple times, but the main real thing is very much looking at the blood pattern in the bathroom, which appeared diluted, but also gave an indication that somebody had tried to clean up.
But while the crime scene had provided some much-needed evidence, other apparent clues turned out to be red herrings. DCS Mark Waters had been assured by fingerprint experts from another police force that there was a bloody partial left thumbprint found in Suzanne's flat.
We matched the fingerprint against this, and it went on for quite a few months. I had my suspects, but I couldn't take it any further because their print didn't match. Whoever left that print was the killer. I think we interviewed over 2,500 people, and there were 4,700 actions. I mean, this went on for 3 or 4 months, and we were getting nowhere. So I decided, right, stop. The first thing I did in Scotland Yard, I asked if they could send me 2 experts to have a look at this print.
Scotland Yard decided that it wasn't a thumbprint at all. And in fact, it was just some piece of clothing that had somehow caused a mark on the door which superficially looked like a thumbprint but wasn't in fact a thumbprint at all. And that really became an opportunity for the investigation to leap forward again.
Now that the team no longer had to search for a match to an erroneous fingerprint, head of CID, Mark Waters, looked again to Suzanne's closest friends for answers.
Messages we were getting from interviewing people was, who didn't you like? Who creepy? Anybody touching you or anything with the girls? And Robson's name came up. Didn't like him. Couldn't pinpoint anything particular, but they didn't like him.
Timothy Robson was another member of the Newport deaf community and had known Suzanne and her boyfriend. And he wasn't well liked.
He didn't seem to treat his mother very nicely. He was quite rude to her, and people had observed that. But people were coming to conclusions about him based on personal dislike and their dislike of the way he behaved, without actually having any hard and fast evidence about what he'd done which could link him to the killing itself.
And it was the boyfriend's testimony that pointed to how Robson might have been able to access Suzanne's flat without breaking in.
He told us that he had been to Robson's house with Suzanne, and when they got back to Suzanne's flat, her keys were missing. She couldn't find her keys. And they'd only been up to Robson's flat, and they contacted him. He said he hadn't seen them, but we think that he took the keys on that visit. This was 3 or 4 days before she was murdered.
Still without enough evidence to charge Robson, detectives went to interview the person closest to him, his wife. Both husband and wife were also deaf.
We managed to get the services of an ex-police officer who had been a welfare officer for them. And he understood them, he knew them. And he joined our team, and he went with us to interview Robson's wife. And she eventually said, look, he came home that night, covered in blood, scratches on his face. He began washing his clothes, including his trainers, which he's never done, ever before. I said, what's happened, what's happened? He said, I've been in a fight in town. We then saw his workmates, because he went to work the following day. They said they saw the scratches on his face. They asked him what had happened. One friend said that he'd been in a fight. The second friend who asked him said he'd fallen off a bar stool in the pub. And I think he gave a further story to someone else. But they did see these scratches.
The evidence from his wife and the inconsistency of his story put Robson firmly in detective sights. And a search of his home would provide another vital clue to link Robson to Suzanne's flat.
His wife identified a red rugby Welsh jersey, which was with a Welsh jacket on it, which is in a drawer in there in his home. She said that's what he wore when he went to play snooker, and he was wearing that night. So he took this sweater, and I said, well, that's the same colour as the fibres, but let's get everybody look. Let's trace it. I want to trace the source of it. We sourced it to Noel Trigg Sports Shop, which was in town at the time. We followed it then to the manufacturers. I think they went to Italy. It was then dyed in Austria. And we followed it all the way back. And we knew that 500 had come into Newport. So it was one of 500. We then sent the garments off to the forensic lab.
And so now we have our known sample. Once we've analysed the fibres from Suzanne's, we would now also then take samples, and a range of samples from different areas on Timothy Robson's jersey. We would conduct the same sort of examinations in terms of looking at and identifying whether they're natural or man-made, the characteristics, maybe looking at the dyes, the construction of the fibres, to determine could they be a possible match. But also, when we wear something, we go through general wear and tear, but there is also weathering that happens as well, which starts to make, this gives us an idea whether those fibres could have come from the same source. So there would have been a comparison, so looking very much underneath the microscope and comparing the fibres recovered from Suzanne's body, and then comparing them to the fibres recovered from the known jersey under a comparison microscope to see if they could have been potentially from the same source.
Because this jersey was a cheap make, unless every other jersey, it matched the fibres, unless every jersey of that 500 batch had been washed in the same temperature, the same number of times, in the same soap, it had the same sunlight on it, exactly the same, this one was unique. The fibres were unique to that one. They did the single probe DNA test, and I was very disappointed because it said we didn't have a DNA. So I was left with Robson coming home with blood, washing his clothes, scratching his face, telling lies basically. Then I had the fibres from his jersey on Suzanne's body. Charge him with murder.
In early 1989, Gwent police in Wales had finally charged a man with the murder of 20-year-old Suzanne Greenhill. Suzanne had been raped and stabbed to death in her own home 7 months earlier. The killer had taped up her eyes, removing another sense that was even more vital, given that Suzanne was profoundly deaf. Now, after months of investigation and interviews, many of which were with members of the deaf community, DCS Mark Waters finally had someone in custody for the murder. His name was Timothy Robson, and he too was partially deaf.
We had an interview then with him, and that was difficult because we had to have welfare officers and somebody watching what was going on. Obviously, interpreters for the defence, interpreters for us. So it was a long affair. He obviously denied the murder.
Robson said that he, at the time of the murder, had been playing snooker in a snooker club in Newport. The police looked into his alibi, and in fact it was quite faulty because he claimed that he'd been playing snooker In fact, a match that was due to take place that evening had been called off because the away team hadn't turned up. And while there were some people who were playing snooker in the club, nobody who was there at the time was able to say that Robson had been present. And so the alibi was pretty shaky.
Yet more evidence was about to be revealed by forensic scientists working on the case. And again, it had come from the initial findings of the crime scene.
There was a bloody sock print that was found in the bathroom. What the police decided to do in order to try to see if that provided evidence against Robson was to get him to walk on some paper which was rolled out between the living room and the bathroom. And so they got him to walk along this paper. And what they did was to really seek to gauge the pressure points that his sock imprint made on the paper. The sock imprint from the floor of the tiling in the bathroom was matched by the imprint of Robson's foot as he walked along. So that was another very important piece of forensic evidence.
The news that the suspect was also deaf was a big shock to Suzanne's friends and the local hearing-impaired community. Finally, on the 3rd of October 1989, with enough evidence to make a strong case against him, Timothy Robson stood trial for the murder of Suzanne Greenhill at Cardiff Crown Court. But all did not go to plan.
The first trial was abandoned because there was a dispute about what had been said in the jury room. One of the jurors said that what was considered by the judge to be some prejudicial comments had been made by another of the jurors during the course of their deliberations, and therefore that trial was abandoned and they had to start again from scratch.
But there was one more piece of forensic evidence which was about to be revealed. Nearly 18 months after Suzanne had died, the new science of DNA profiling would reveal once and for all Robson's guilt.
The second trial started, and I was down in Exeter at a forensic meeting and was told that they'd found Robson's DNA on Suzanne. So I contacted the trial and spoke to our prosecutor and said, look, they've got DNA on Robson. So we were in a situation there where the trial was stopped again while they checked this. I got to the court. The QC for the defence and the junior went down to see Robson with an interpreter. They put this to him, that he had said, yes, I killed her, but I'm not completely guilty. I've not admitted it. And I think they then said, well, we've got to withdraw. So the judge stopped the trial.
After this alleged admission, Timothy Robson lost his case in a third trial. But it still wasn't the end of the story for Mark Waters and his team. Despite Robson being found guilty, he won the right to appeal, and a retrial was called. And at the end of this fourth trial, after nearly 3 years in and out of court, Robson was convicted again and sentenced to life in prison for the rape and murder of Suzanne Greenhill. For Mark, the satisfaction of securing a successful conviction was marred by the torment still suffered by Suzanne's family.
You know, I'm a father of young daughters, and of course, you you always live in fear of something like this happening. And then you've got her parents, you know, and the people that have supported her. The sense of grief is unbearable. You know, unless anybody's been in that situation, they wouldn't know. It's really unbearable. Feels the sadness that you can't get the look of the mother and father from your face. You might feel sort of, oh please, that's done, but to them it's just a start, really. You know, and you see their little faces and think, oh Jesus, you know. When they go back and have a cup of tea, what are they going to do? You know, they've lost a daughter. It's nice to get it done with and get a result, but at the end of the day, there's two people there who are going to suffer for the rest of their lives. And whatever you do, you can't get rid of it. No matter how you lock up 10 people, it doesn't matter. You're not bringing the daughter back.
This is a case that still resonates in the deaf community of Newport. People are still talking about it. People remember Suzanne. They are still, in a sense, traumatized about it today. And of course, we're talking about a murder that took place well over 30 years ago, and yet people are still talking about it to this day. So it's clear that the murder and what transpired afterwards, when they discovered that it was in fact one of their own community who had been responsible for killing Suzanne, has had a traumatic effect on the deaf community of Newport, which has lasted right up to today.
One member of that community was Suzanne's childhood friend, Angela, who still thinks of the bond they shared and the woman her friend would have become.
Hello.